I'm going to introduce and talk about a case of Amjad. It's a client of mine who I've seen for a while. And please note that this is not his real name. It's just a name that I came up with and named him like that. And also he gave me a permission to talk about the case. But also, I'm going to tell you how we started the treatment, how we made assessment with him, and the last part of my presentation will be dedicated to interventions and the outcomes of the treatment. So here we go, just to start with a bit of a background for Amjad. He came from Iraq to Australia. He is of Mandai community, ethnicity and religion. We have quite a lot of Mandai ethnic minorities settling in Liverpool, and we see quite a lot of them out of our Liverpool office at Starts. He is aged 52 years old, and the date of arrival is in 2012. As you can see, he's been here for quite a while, for 7 years. He's married with 3 children, so that's a bit of a background information. The reasons he was referred to Starts, he was referred by his wife, who was a previous client at Starts, and she came in and she had concerns for her husband. And it is very important to note that she came not for fear of her safety, but for concern for him. She said she's worried that his behavior has changed. He has not there was no previous history of domestic violence with him. The onset started in Australia, and she was concerned that something is happening for him internally that causes him to behave that way. We did a bit of assessment at the intake just to identify if we can work with him because it can be tricky to work with the perpetrator of domestic violence. We really have to assess if we can take this case on board. She described that again, there was no previous history and there was no safety concern for her or her children. The domestic violence she described was control of finances. He would ask receipts from her. He would demand every detail for every dollar she would spend. There was very little that she could control as of money in the family. He was verbally abusive at times, calling her names, yelling at her. So there was verbal abuse, and the anger attacks that were happening and increasing over time. The anger attacks that he would be having short fuse, explode, throw things, knock the furniture, sometimes break things. That was quite unusual behavior for him, and she was concerned for that. And she was convinced that perhaps seeing a counselor at Starts, and she said if you could talk to him and find out what's happening, he might find help here, meaning at Starts. When Amjad came to the first session with me, I was astonished how engaging he was, how collaborative, how elaborative he was in talking about his history, in engaging in conversation, in elaborating a lot. He is well educated and well spoken, and he really was, it seemed to me he was really seeking help and was able to collaborate and was able to honestly speak about his experiences, which was already, I thought, a great prerequisite to start the treatment, to start working with this client. So he spoke about his history. Even in the first session we met, he was eager to talk. So he said he was persecuted as the person of a Mandai background for a long time, even at school, being ostracized, being bullied, being called names. He's always remembered being different and being sort of pushed out in a society a little bit. Not a little bit, it was quite a profound experience for him. Then there was an attack in his house that happened several years ago, prior to him fleeing Iraq, what happened was he ran a jewelry shop. He was a jeweler, had a business in Iraq, and lived and owned a shop and worked there every day. And one day he was attacked, robbed. His wife was assaulted in front of him. He did not disclose much of what actually happened during that incident of assault, but he remembers being close to death, feeling intense fear, feeling fearful for his children, and it was a very intense episode. Then what happened afterwards, he had to flee from Iraq to Jordan, so he lost all the money, possessions, the business, the status, what he had at home, he had to quickly leave behind and flee for the safety. So that was a traumatic experience as well. Just a bit of an overview for you of a family tree that I bring up here, so that you know basically that his children are already adults, so there was no child safety issue here when I did my assessment. Then his wife, younger than him by 10 years, and he's got a relatively small family because he only has got 4 other siblings. 3 of them live in Sweden and a brother here in Australia, and the relationship with this brother, I can tell a little bit about it later. And his parents passed away already. So he, like I mentioned, he was very engaging. He was very collaborative in talking about his symptoms, and he really, it felt like information was just pouring out of him. He was really eager to talk. So the first thing that was really bothering him is having poor sleep, having ruminative thoughts, and having difficulty to fall asleep, and getting frustrated, that frustration that was brewing in him constantly, 24/7. Being frustrated for not being able to sleep, thinking too much, being frustrated for that. So he did, and probably a very important point at that time of my assessment that I noticed is that he does accept responsibility, or does have quite an insight about himself getting angry and doing this in a family and lashing out in a family. So he was able to talk about it. There was a certain degree of shame and reluctance to talk about it in the community. No one would know. So his brother, the brother's family, or the community would not know about it. But he was able to talk about his symptoms, his psychological difficulties, and about the anger attacks there in the session with me. So when he did sleep, he would have recurrent nightmares of a persecutor in nature. So he would always be running away from somewhere, hiding. So quite unpleasant nightmares. Intrusive memories of the traumatic incidents of what happened in Iraq. He said he would often isolate himself, go to the backyard, sit alone, and just ruminate, and these thoughts would come to him, the memories would come to him, like really, he said, like watching a movie. What followed from all these symptoms was a tremendous social isolation and withdrawal from everyone. He would not socialize in a community, he would decline all invitations to birthdays, gatherings, and just would prefer not to communicate with people. And the anger attacks, again, he was able to recognize them, he was able to talk about them and take some responsibility. And the way I was able to connect with that, and I suppose just referring to your presentation earlier, in terms of recognizing how that affects the other people, I'm probably going to talk about it in sort of in the intervention part of how we approach that point. Just to tell you briefly how we approach treatment at STARTS, and how do we actually conceptualize a case and do case formulation here with every single client that comes across, and how we actually conceptualize a case and we see where we need to focus our attention and how we can approach the treatment of the client in sort of holistic way. So for this client, for Amjad, like I mentioned earlier, the exile, the migration and resettlement stressors were very present for him, and the cultural transition factors were very present for him. Then he had normal life cycle stressors, the kids that have grown up, them needed to access education or them needing to access work, and he himself being unemployed and still struggling with the English language. These are all normal life stressors and the resettlement stressors that were really pressuring for him and quite unpleasant, and creating a lot of stress. The recovery environment stressors that were present for him is needing to get familiar with the Australian systems, having medical appointments, having appointments for his kids at school, or supporting his kids through college or TAFE application. All of that was quite stressful already, and on top of that he had trauma reactions, like very significant psychological reactions, like poor sleep, poor concentration, the intrusive memories and the ruminative thoughts. On top of that, he was quite affected by the international events, the stressors of what's happening overseas, because he quite often used to check social media or news from home, and getting very worried about people who are left behind in Iraq, and then feeling helpless from that, and then that would restart ruminative thoughts, and that would restart that frustration that brewed with him for pretty much all day or all night long. However, so all of that happening for the family and for Amjad in particular really led him to feel like he's out of control. He can't restore the balance. It's sort of the life and the family life or his own life just slipped out of his fingers, and he has nothing, no control. There's no meaning, no control. That sense of hopelessness that we very well connected that sense of hopelessness with that anger outbursts and anger attacks, and always feeling on edge, and always feeling like he's about to explode on people nearby. And who was nearby? It was wife, it was kids, it was because he was not even encountering other people, so he was isolated as well. Okay, so the interventions that we, sort of how we approached treating this case together, we, like I said, he was a very collaborative client, so that kind of made my job a little bit easier, because I know sometimes it can be really hard to engage men in a community, very hard. There is a certain reluctance to explore these issues, and there is certain difficulty to start really addressing like partner violence issues. So the first thing that was happening in our treatment is the most important is building safety and trust with the client. So how I did it is being reliable with my appointments, making them at the same time, using the same interpreter that he has requested, that he was comfortable with, and he always shown up on time and always was present there and never missed a single appointment. And also I outlined clear boundaries and clarity of my role, what is my role as a counselor and what can I support him with, but also what is his role, how he can actively participate in treatment, that it's not me fixing him, but how he can, what can he try and think about and then bring to the next session for us to work together. The second important point that happened in treatment is the psychoeducation, because I really explained to him that what the symptoms that he's talking about is essentially the effects of trauma, the way his brain is reacting, the way his body is reacting, brewing that anger, brewing the resentment, having the sense of loss, and how it feels in his body and then explodes. That made a lot of sense to him. So when that did make a lot of sense, he was actually surprised that these things could be looked at, that these things could be explored. It's not just something that happens to me, but it's something that I can understand, and something that's possibly could be changed, that's something that's possibly is not so much unknown or mysterious. So psychoeducation, we did a lot as well in regards to healthy sleep, in regards to improving his sleep and his moods and concentration, things like that. And then the main body of the treatment was the trauma counseling, and that's where we focused on the relationship, because the main questions that we're asking, and I suppose the questions that we asked for Amjad is what is the most important thing for him now in life, and it is relationships, of course, and his attachment to his wife and his attachment to his kids was number one for him. And then we looked at how actually his behaviors are hurting this, how damaging, how much damage that creates. And he was able to, it was a very explorative treatment, and the client was willing to participate, to explore, to ask questions, why this happens, and then sort of follow and dig out the reasons. Also with the trauma counseling, we did quite a lot of building, and I suppose I need to share here in terms of why, when we dig out that, what happens with the relationships and what happens when the anger explodes. And when I asked why you sort of explode at home, he said, well, it's safe to explode. The wife isn't going anywhere. Or she's my partner, and, she's safe to listen, and she's there to listen. Then we sort of addressed the fact that, yes, it is damaging, but it's also damaging for him, because it's not nice to feel frustrated all the time. It's not nice to get angry. It's not nice to explode. It's damaging for him as a number one. And he started asking the question as to sort of what hurts so much that he is getting angry. And what hurt so much was the grief and loss of what he has lost in Iraq. And then we identified, I suppose, how that the loss of status was a big thing for him, because he felt so weak and so meaningless and so useless here in Australia. He felt like he has got nothing to offer. So we had quite a few discussions in terms of, is there anything that he can offer at all, or was money and jewelry and status back in Iraq was the only thing that was of him? What's left of him as a human here in Australia that could be useful or could have the meaning? So I suppose trauma counseling really winds up into finding the meaning for a person post-trauma. That's really the healing of how you can live post-trauma. While he was coming and attending a treatment, the incidents of the domestic violence have reduced significantly, and he has started, I suppose, that building skills, the anger management and building coping skills. I think he has done it himself, because he started coming up with things and telling me what he has done differently to actually not get angry or not to act out. And I'm just reminded about the relationship with his brother, because originally he said, I'm not in a good contact with my brother. He has his family, I have my family, because there was a lot of shame of how he sees his situation at home, and he didn't want to disclose and talk to his brother about what's going on for him. But actually finding out that talking and counseling helps so much, he said he was more likely to then go and talk to the brother. Maybe not about heart-to-heart intimate conversations, but at least conversations help, and that what he took out of it, that's what he learned. The treatment outcomes. So he has attended 24 sessions altogether on a fortnightly basis. Like I mentioned, he did have a good commitment to treatment. The reduced incidence of domestic violence were demonstrated in the fact that he learned to manage anger. Because I think that increased honesty about feelings did influence a lot of that outcome. I think that's underpinning the need, that need to explode, the need to react, often comes from the need to express something that wasn't expressed previously. And the shift of perception of self and the role in the family that occurred. So he started doing housework and have more shared partnership with the wife. So he would be putting clothing on the line and maybe helping her with the groceries, carry something, because a part of our conversations, okay, what you can offer, what else is left of you, what sort of strengths you can offer to your family. If it's not money, if it's not status, what kind of strengths and guidance can you offer as a male now in your family? And the finding belonging in the community, that was a big shift for him, because he was able to start accepting invitations to some of the celebrations, some of the religious ceremonies, and some of the birthdays and some of the engagement and events, and he was able to come and start enjoying them. And he found that actually he can belong to a Mandai community here, and it's actually a wonderful feeling, because he can openly be a Mandai and not persecuted anymore, and can share these beliefs with the community members. Thank you for listening.